Now let's make two things clear. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. And ISIL is certainly not a state.
Church and state should not be separated.
I hear you talk about this all the time. I have more Muslim friends than probably all of you guys combined, and they live here in America, and they don't subscribe to that.
In America, that's 3 million out of 1.6 billion. Exactly. In America.
But shouldn't they be saved from being a part of that description?
Of course. But shouldn't the other ones be included in it? Shouldn't the liberals in this country stand with all those people who have to face what I call everyday terrorism?
Let's add to the weight of the 3 million. There are plenty in Indonesia.
No one's saying all
You know what? In
Muslims are
Indonesia,
people.
if a woman wants to join the military, she has to undergo what they call the 2-finger test.
What?
They put that in her.
Dirty.
It is dirty. They want to see if she's a virgin. And this is the moderate country that they hold up as an example.
And look, and this is part of the U.S. foreign policy, is trying to promote LGBT
let me
rights around the world.
see if I've got you straight here. So you want our president, whether it's Trump or Obama or Clinton or whomever, to go out and declare war on all these people who don't believe the way you do?
Where'd you get that?
Well,
when did I say
what do you do
war?
about it then?
I said get real.
Oh, get real? Okay, what does that mean?
It means establishing
Stand up for liberal values. Stand up for things that, if they were happening in...
Well, I can guarantee you...
Liberal, not liberal with a small L, not liberal political.
What are
liberal like in... from the French Revolution.
So you would
like
side with
separation of church and state, equality of women.
But how are you going to bring this to them?
Well, first of all,
by force?
Of course not.
Well, you've got 50 people in the State Department right now using the dissent channel saying that that's what we should be doing in Syria.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not in the State Department, and I'm not one of them. Thank you, panel.
At that hearing, we heard testimony that described a systematic effort. If one compares, for example, the 9/11 Commission report, the word jihad appears in that report 126 times. The word Muslim appears in that report 145 times. The word Islam appears in that report 322 times. And yet, since that 9/11 Commission report, different policies have come into effect. And as a matter of systematic policy, those terms are no longer allowed to be used in this administration. The FBI counterterrorism lexicon uses the word jihad 0 times. The National Intelligence Strategy of 2009 uses the word jihad 0 times. The Strategic Implementation Plan to Prevent Violent Extremism of 2011 uses the word 0 times. The National Intelligence Strategy in 2014 uses the word 0 times. We also heard testimony from a former employee of the Department of Homeland Security, Phil Haney, that in October 2009, more than 800 Customs and Border Patrol documents were ordered modified, scrubbed, or deleted to remove references to jihad or the Muslim Brotherhood or other similar references. Was Mr. Haney's testimony that the Department of Homeland Security ordered over 800 documents in CBB altered or deleted, was that testimony accurate?
I have no idea. I don't know who Mr. Heenan is. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room.
So you have not investigated whether your department ordered documents to be modified in 2009 to remove references to jihad, radical Islamic terrorism, the Muslim Brotherhood. You have not investigated that question?
No, I have not taken the time to investigate what Mr. Heenan says, no.
And when the United States Senate Judiciary Oversight Committee conducted a hearing on that, did you or anyone in your staff inquire into those issues?
No, but you have me right here, right now to ask questions of. So
but apparently your answer is you don't know. I am asking you, in 2009 and again in 2012, Mr. Haney testified there were 2 purges, and that was the word he used, purge, at the Department of Homeland Security to remove references to radical Islamic terrorism. Is it accurate that the records were changed?
Same answer I gave you before. I have no idea, sir.
You have no knowledge of any records being changed at the Department of Homeland Security?
Same answer. I have no idea, sir.
Would it concern you if it was accurate?
Senator, I find this whole debate to be very interesting, but I have to tell you, when I was at the Department of Defense giving the legal sign-off on a lot of drone strikes, I didn't particularly care whether the baseball card said Islamic extremist or violent extremist. I think this is very interesting, but it makes no difference to me in terms of who we need to go after, who is determined to attack our homeland. The other point I'd like to make, sir, is that, and I have to think in practical terms in Homeland Security. I think this is all very interesting, makes for good political debate, but in practical terms, if we, in our efforts here in the homeland, start giving the Islamic State the credence that they want to be referred to as part of Islam or some form of Islam, we will get nowhere in our efforts to build bridges with Muslim communities, which we need to do in this current environment right now that includes homegrown violent extremists.
They all tell me, my time is limited for this
Hold
question.
on just a second, please. They all tell me that ISIL has hijacked my religion, and it's critical that we bring these people to our side to do this.
You're entitled to give speeches other times. My question was if you were aware that the information has been scrubbed. I would note the title of the hearing on Tuesday was willful blindness, and your testimony to this full committee now is that you have no idea and apparently have no intention of finding out
That's not what
whether DHS materials have been scrubbed. And you suggested just a moment ago that it's essentially a semantic difference. Well, I don't believe it is a semantic difference, that when you erase references to radical jihad, it impacts the behavior of law enforcement and national security to respond to red flags and prevent terrorist attacks before they occur.
Shirley Williams.
I think it was a mistake. I think that if it was, as it's said to be, a reward for lifelong literary endeavour, then all I can say is that I think the timing was very odd indeed. I want to say very clearly that I don't believe the Prime Minister had anything whatsoever to do with it. I think it came up from a departmental proposal, which is what usually happens with knighthoods, and a lot of the political sort of firestorm that started has been started quite incorrectly. Nevertheless, I think the Department of Culture and the media, which I think put his name forward, were not very wise to do it in that way. This is a man who has deeply offended Muslims in a very powerful way, who's been protected by the British police against threats of suicide for years and years, at great expense to the taxpayer. And frankly, I think that it was not wise and not very clever to give him a knighthood.
Christopher Hitchens.
I think that's a contemptible statement, and I think everyone who applauded it should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves. Do you think, really, that it's a waste of time and money defending free expression from suicide murderers? If you do, can you think of a better cause the money should go on? When I hear idle talk about how this country and this culture could or should punch above its weight, as we say, I think, well, what do we have that's better than our language? And isn't it extraordinary that we have an author who has helped spark a renaissance of writing in the subcontinent that's produced a whole new branch of English literature there written in our language, who knows it better than, I may say, some of our politicians appear to do. Tariq Ramadan, who you may have heard of, who's become something of a self-appointed spokesman for Islam in Western Europe, had the following to say the other day, a man with whom I've often disagreed. He said, "It is entirely up to the British who they nominate for an award." I hope you'll at least agree with that. Oh, you don't? All right. He went on to say something perhaps you don't know. He said the protests against it in Pakistan are purely a matter of violent, vicious internal politics there. It's part of a jostling for position. People who claim to be offended can by all means do so. It takes a lot to make me cry. But people who say, I'm so offended I'm going to start suicide bombing in my country, have to be told, no, that's an unpardonable interference in our internal affairs. And it shouldn't have been our High Commissioner who was called in by the Pakistani government to be lectured. We should have hauled in the envoy of Pakistan here and said, stop that right now, or do without all the aid we give you. Okay. Do without the protection and alliance that you've prospered from out of our kindness and generosity. Okay. We won't have talk of murder for the writing of novels. And I see that whatever I say, there's a sort of sullen, resentful, boring atmosphere in this room.
Thank you. You stop, that's better.
It's a monologue. It's not a dialogue. These students, same students, feel offended that your views of Islam, the generalization, and they said it clearly in their declaration, they said the generalization perpetuate bigotry. This is what they said. Look, I am all for freedom for speech. I love debates. I hate monologues. When you invite somebody to a commencement speech, you said it, it's about the students. And the New York Times in this piece this morning said, you can counter a bad speech with a good speech, except they don't have that venue. They don't have that opportunity that day of graduation. They can't opt out of that. And
I'm not going to be speaking about that subject, as I just said.
But does that mean we never have speeches? Every speech has to be two people?
But this is a commencement speech. This is a commencement address of these students who are actually... Listen, would you accept an openly anti-Semitic person to give a commencement speech to a Jewish student? I actually would not accept that.
As I just said, even Reza Aslan says I'm not a bigot, so I rather resent the idea that I'm comparable to an anti-Semite. All I've ever done was basically read facts.
What facts did you read?
Well,
you never invited.
But
I'm sorry,
listen,
you are
Bill,
comparing... I am sorry, Bill.
Bill, I don't think we want to read...
You are comparing jihadists, Salafists, Sunni. You don't know the difference. You're comparing all Muslims in one pot.
You're a Palestinian.
And I am actually a secular Muslim. And when you talk about Islam in a certain way, I have to tell you, and it's offensive sometimes, some people feel
But it's
threatened.
okay to be offensive. That's what free speech is all about. If free speech is only speech you like, it's not free speech.
They invited him for a debate. He can go to a debate. I will accompany you in that debate if you want. I'm happy to have that debate wherever you want.
He was invited to be a commencement speaker, and then he made a statement that people didn't like.
I don't know what to say. I can understand.
Can you be gay in Gaza?
Yes, you can.
Really?
Yes, you can.
And live?
Absolutely, you can. You know what? It's even more offensive because you're saying...
I'm just asking because I've heard
you can be gays in Gaza.
Really?
I traveled the Middle East.
Is there a gay bar in Gaza?
This is what...
Grey area, isn't it? Miriam, you wanted to come back in.
Well, I mean, I was going to say there are certainly things that are offensive, but do we need to offend people by saying them? I mean, there's a way of saying things. We can discuss the institution of the monarchy in this country without insulting the Queen. It therefore makes it perfectly reasonable and possible to discuss, I think, the tenets and beliefs of any other religion without insulting sensibilities.
Insulting sensibilities, that's interesting. Without insulting sensibilities. Okay, some Muslims think that music and dancing are haram and should be forgiven, not forgiven, wrong word, Freudian slip, forbidden, haram, that it's forbidden. So if I were to say, music, forbidden, haram, that is just bonkers. Now, some people are going to find that extremely offensive, aren't they? Have I offended sensibilities? Do I have the right to say that?
I think if people that are used to having debates within the interfaith debates are pretty familiar with the codes and practices of different religions and understand where those boundaries lie. And certainly that would not be one of those boundaries. But there are certain things that even people with no religion would find offensive. If I was to come on TV and start insulting, you know, I mean, I hate to be crass, but your mother, that would be extremely offensive. Now, we feel as strongly about our mothers as we do about the Prophet Muhammad. That doesn't mean you can't discuss what he says, the message he brings.
People in this country put up with being offended. Walking down the street, you get offended. There's somebody wearing something you don't like, or you get offended. It's part of being grown up. It's just accepting the fact that you get your feelings trodden upon. Does it mean you have to deliberately tread on people's feelings? No, not necessarily.
Exactly.
But what you cannot do is to ring fence one ideology through fear, intimidation, or anything else, and that is what we see happening. That's what Ben Ellsworth is saying.
Richard Dawkins, Professor, you've obviously, I mean, a lot of people have taken offence at some of the things that you've written. You know, they feel personally offended because they feel that their faith, which is so dear to them, and their belief, which they cherish, has, you know, you're criticising it. Do you think about that?
I don't go out of my way to offend.
No, but do you think about the possible consequences?
If people are offended, then they may argue against me. All I use is words. There's a radical distinction between using words and violence, and incitement to violence. The Salman Rushdie affair brings this out. Salman Rushdie simply wrote a book. That's what he did. He wrote a book. He was threatened with death. He was threatened with death by baying crowds in this country. People burned his books. They demanded the death penalty.
And some leading parliamentarians suggested that the paperback shouldn't come out.
Some leading parliamentarians, some leading clergymen, some leading bishops sided with the Ayatollah Khomeini rather than sided with this very distinguished novelist who did no more than put words on paper. That is a radical distinction.
Can I let Miriam come back in?
House Democrats right there staging a 16-hour sit-in over gun control, nearly coming to blows over what an enraged Republican congressman sees as the real threat. It's not guns, it's...
Equal crime, talking about Islam, radical Islam, kill these poor people. No fly, no gun. No fly, no gun. No fly, no gun.
Incredible. That was on Periscope. Here to react, that enraged lawmaker himself, now much calmer, Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert. Congressman, tell us what brought you to that moment.
Well, this has been going on for hours. It should have been stopped hours before. Even some of the long-term Democrats have said, this is really getting out of hand. You guys need to take over and stop the chaos. This is a little scary. And the Democrats had taken control of all 8 microphones at the point that the footage you showed was on. The microphones were not on, but they had taken over the chamber. Yeah. And this is unprecedented. It was incredible. They were blocking business. So they weren't just standing up for rights, they were taking away rights. And I'm telling you, Brian, it was incredible to see, you know, real American folk heroes like John Lewis, who were brutalized and stood up for civil rights. Folks were there using the instruments that helped gain civil rights to try to take away people's civil rights. And I just saw this article, had seen this yesterday. 81,000 names are on the no-fly list, but fewer than 1,000 are Americans. It means if this administration would protect us from people coming in, and then we wouldn't have to worry about maybe 1,000 people.
Congressman Lewis
was on
the no-fly list. Congressman Lewis was on the no-fly list, erroneously, by the way.
Well, and so was Martin Luther King Jr. back when he was alive. I mean, it's insane to try to take away our civil rights, our Second Amendment rights. And I'll tell you, the gun-free zones are where these terrorists like to go because they know they're protected. And then they were fundraising. They're doing fundraising calls based on the deaths of these people, and we're standing up for it. It is just so outrageous what was going on. Right. Well, and Congressman,
the line reads this: Romney's statement on Libya. Email says this is what Ben was talking about. I assume Ben is the now somewhat famous Ben Rhodes, author of the Talking Points memo. This email is at 10:35, 27 minutes after your 10:08 statement. 27 minutes after you've told everyone it's a video. While Americans are still fighting because the attack's still going on, your top people are talking politics. Seems to me that night you had 3 options, Secretary. You could tell the truth, like you did with the family, like you did with the Libyan president, like you did with the Egyptian prime minister. Tell them it was a terrorist attack. You could say, you know what, we're not quite sure. Don't really know for sure. I don't think the evidence is there. I think it's all in the first one, but you could have done that. But you picked a third option. You picked the video narrative. You picked the one with no evidence, and you did it because Libya was supposed to be, as Mr. Roskin pointed out, this great success story for the Obama White House and the Clinton State Department. And a key campaign theme that year was GM's alive, bin Laden's dead, Al-Qaeda's on the run. And now you have a terrorist attack. And it's a terrorist attack in Libya. And it's just 56 days before an election. You can live with a protest about a video. That won't hurt you. But a terrorist attack will. So you can't be square with the American people. You can tell your family it's a terrorist attack, but not the American people. You can tell the president of Libya it's a terrorist attack, but not the American people. And you can tell the Egyptian prime minister it's a terrorist attack, but you can't tell your own people the truth. Madam Secretary, Americans can live with the fact that good people sometimes give their lives for this country. They don't like it. They mourn for those families. They pray for those families. But they can live with it. But what they can't take, what they can't live with, is when their government's not square with them. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.